Welcome back to Take Care Time, the tales and exhales of caregivers. I'm your host, Beverly Nance. When we left off last week, Ralph Raines Sr. had moved into Rachel Lee's Portland, Oregon home, a home that was purchased by Ralph Raines Jr., by the way. Rachel Lee convinced Ralph Jr. that it was easier if she moved his dad in with her to provide his care. Unfortunately, it would be a stretch to call what she was doing care. With his father's health declining, it was important for Ralph Jr. to show his father that he could take care of the family business. Ralph Jr. told Rachel Lee that there was still something that he really, really wanted. That was a family of his own. He wanted a wife. He wanted kids. Less than a year later, Rachel, with all her psychic abilities, told Ralph Jr. that she predicted that he would meet a blonde woman with an English accent in the near future. So guess what happened? When Ralph was on his way to a conference, he stepped outside the airport to smoke a cigarette, and that's where he met Mary Marks. Her name was Mary Marks, and they seemingly met by chance. She was exactly the type of woman that Ralph Jr. was looking for. Imagine that. He had already told Rachel the type of woman he was attracted to. A blonde, English accent. So when Mary Marks sits down next to him, it feels like fate. Mary Marks told Ralph Jr. that she was a British exchange student in her 20s. She had long blonde hair, she wore glasses, and a hat. Ralph Jr. and Mary struck up a friendship immediately, talking by phone, no email, no text, and almost 2 years later, in 2009, they got married. Mary Marks told Ralph Jr. that she would have to go back to England for a while because of complications with her visa. Ralph gave her money to go back to England for 6 months so that she can get her green card and return. When she returned, she went to California. It was an unusual arrangement. Mary lived in California to continue her education, and Ralph Jr. lived on the tree farm in Oregon. Like any other husband, Ralph Jr. was devoted to his wife. Mary told Ralph Jr. that she was also a bookkeeper. Imagine that. And he handed over some of the responsibilities to her, in addition to Rachel, to handle his finances. On one of Mary's trips to the tree farm to visit her husband, they agreed that it was time to start a family. About 9 months later, Mary reported to Ralph Jr. that they were the proud parents of a son, who she named Giorgio Armani. No relation to the clothing brand. Mary traveled from California to Oregon about once a month with little Giorgio to visit Ralph Jr., who was never happier. He had what he'd always wanted, a wife in Mary, a son, and plus a good friend named Rachel. Ralph wanted to show his dad that he had an heir, and he was capable of taking care of the family legacy. In 2011, Ralph Sr. died at the age of 91. Ralph Sr. had maintained control over the family estate up until his death. Now Ralph Jr. stood to inherit the entire estate that was estimated to be worth $15 million. With his father gone, Ralph Jr. was unsure how to manage the estate. He was a tree farmer, not a CEO. So Rachel offered to help. Rachel took care of everything financial. Of course, Rachel did. Wow, does anybody else need a break? As we listen to today's story and the importance of vigilance and care for our seniors, let's not forget the real caregivers who dedicate their lives to protecting and nurturing their loved ones. To all the caregivers out there, it's time for you to take a moment for yourself with the Take Care Time Respite Box. Each bi-monthly box is filled with items carefully selected to promote relaxation and rejuvenation. from soothing teas and aromatherapy oils to inspirational books and personal care products. Every item is chosen to help you recharge and refresh during your well-deserved respite. Take Your Time understands the challenges you face and the strength you bring each day. That's why we've created something just for you, to remind you that taking care of yourself is just as important as the care you give to others. Subscribe today and give yourself the gift of self-care. Visit takecaretime.com to learn more and to order your first box, because sometimes the most important care is taking a moment for yourself. Back to our story. In 2013, Liz Carruthers was a detective in Portland, Oregon. On her commute to work, she would pass by the small town called Canby. Liz kept noticing something odd. She, being a detective, it was her job to, well, detect. Canby is a small farming town, and Liz kept noticing a Ferrari and thought it odd that in a farming town where most people have trucks, she kept seeing this Ferrari. The Ferrari screamed money, and it was parked repeatedly in front of the psychic shop. Liz kept both the Ferrari and the psychic shop in the back of her mind, and in January of 2014, she attended a law enforcement seminar focused on fraud. In the early 2010s, there was a rise in fraud schemes in Oregon, elder fraud being one of them. During a break, Liz chatted with her fellow attendees. That is when she ran into Steve Floyd. Steve was from Canby, and the Ferrari and the psychic shop were still in the back of her mind. She asked him, very sarcastically, "When are you going to do something about the psychic shop?" As it happens, Marlene Olson was also at that same seminar. She had stopped working in the logging industry and was now working at the Department of Justice. Marlene overheard Liz ask Steve about the psychic shop in Canby. Steve said, "Well, Ralph Raines owns that property." Not many people knew the name Raines, but Marlene did because she had worked on the farm. Her interest piqued. What did Ralph Jr. have to do with the psychic shop? Marlene turned and said, "Ralph Raines Tree Farm?" They stepped outside to talk about it. Marlene and Steve came up with a plan. Since Marlene knew the family, she would drive out to the tree farm and talk to Ralph Jr. to see what was going on. After the conference, she drove out to Cherry Grove, the small town where the road ends at the Raines Tree Farm. But when she arrived, Marlene was stunned. The farm looked nothing like she remembered. Marlene remembered the Raines Tree Farm had acres and acres of trees, 1,200 acres to be exact, and now the land was stripped bare. All the trees were gone. Marlene, shocked, stood there for a while before walking up to the house to see if Ralph Jr. was home. The doors were wide open. There was no one there. She called out for Ralph Jr. He was not there, so she walked back to her car unhappy. Marlene then went around to the neighbors, asking if anyone noticed anything unusual or suspicious. A few houses down, a neighbor pulled up on his tractor, and Marlene asked, "What's going on? What happened to the trees? How is Ralph Jr. doing?" Marlene got an earful about how the trees had been cut down. He didn't know what was going on. Ralph Jr. wouldn't talk to him, and there is no way that this woman, Mary, was his wife. And he just couldn't believe it. And then the neighbor's wife came out, and she echoed everything that her husband had to say. They were not just skeptical about Mary Marks. They also didn't have anything nice to say about Rachel Lee and her family. The people who Ralph Jr. spent most of his time with, they were happy someone was finally asking questions. Between seeing the tree farm completely cut down, the reports from the neighbors, and Ralph Jr. listed as the owner of a psychic shop, it all sounded like a fraud scheme to Marlene. The Canby police officially opened an investigation. Detective Steve Floyd subpoenaed Ralph Jr.'s bank records to look at the transactions. And what did he find? Well, it looked like Ralph Jr. had recently purchased a bunch of real estate, which included an apartment complex, a house in Canby, a few homes in Portland, and the psychic shop, also located in Canby. The money to purchase the real estate came from the money that was made from the sale of the tree farm. Ralph Jr. had apparently sold off almost every acre to a company that had clear-cut the land. The 1,200 acres that was once the Raines family tree farm was now an A-frame house and a few acres of land. The bank records also revealed lavish expenses, trips to Europe, sports cars, and of course, that Ferrari. Those cars were not at Ralph Jr.'s house. They were parked at Rachel's house. Rachel, the bookkeeper, was supposed to be managing the finances, investing Ralph Jr.'s money to make it last. Instead, it looked like she was spending the money on her lifestyle. The detective, Steve, took the bank records with him when he went to Ralph Jr.'s house. Steve arrived at the house and greeted Ralph Jr., who looked like he had just finished working outside. Steve told Ralph that they were there checking on some suspicious activity on his bank records. Ralph immediately became stressed. Steve asked about the farm, and Ralph Jr. said that he had sold the farm, and Steve asked why. Ralph Jr. said Rachel said they had to sell it because the IRS was going to take it. Rachel, who by now knew everything about Ralph Jr., knew that he distrusted the government and believed in conspiracy theories, had convinced him that they would take his farm and he needed to sell it and invest the money. Ralph Jr. trusted Rachel. Steve then asked Ralph Jr. about his spending habits and if he had purchased any fancy cars. Steve wanted to know if he gave money to Rachel or gave her permission to purchase a Ferrari. No. Did you know she had purchased the car with his money? Again, he said no. By the end of the conversation, Ralph Jr. was in a daze. He had come to terms with the fact that Rachel had been stealing from him. Rachel, his friend, or so he thought. Ralph was embarrassed. Still, he wanted his money back. He didn't want Rachel charged, and he thinks Mary Marks may be involved and didn't want her charged either. Join us next week for the conclusion of Timber, where we find out who the real Mary Marks is. Until next week, take care. As we close today's chapter of Part 2 of Timber, we are reminded of the vulnerabilities that can accompany even the most seemingly secure fortunes. It's crucial to remain vigilant, especially in protecting our seniors from potential scams. Here are a few key strategies that I will repeat everyone should consider to help safeguard the finances and well-being of the elderly in our communities. Regular communication. Keep regular contact with elderly family members. Open and frequent communications helps to reduce their isolation, a condition scammers often exploit, and allow you to spot any sudden and unusual changes in their behavior or financial situations. Had Ralph Jr. had open communications with other people in his community, perhaps this would not have happened to him. Number 2, educate about common scams. Educate yourself and your elderly loved ones about the most common types of scams. Information is power. Discuss how these scams work and remind them never to share personal or financial information over the phone and online with strangers. It's so easy for seniors to be caught up in these scams because they're trusting. Number 3, encourage skepticism. Encourage a healthy level of skepticism in our elderly family members. Remind them that it's okay to say no. Hang up the phone or delete an email. Legitimate businesses and government agencies will not use high-pressure tactics to ask for sensitive information unexpectedly. Number 4, set up financial safeguards. Help set up safeguards on financial accounts. These could include setting up alerts for unusual transactions, establishing a durable power of attorney, or using financial management services that require dual approval for significant transactions. Number 5, professional advice. Consult with professionals. Encourage regular reviews of financial health with trusted and reputable financial advisors and legal professionals. This can be especially helpful in making sound decisions and avoiding dubious schemes. And finally, number 6, report and discuss. Finally, make sure they know how to report a scam. Discuss the importance of reporting any suspicious activity to authorities. This not only helps in potentially recovering lost funds, but it also prevents scammers from harming others. By fostering an environment of awareness and support, we can protect our seniors from deceitful tactics of scammers and ensure their golden years remain safe and secure. Until next week, keep watch and take care.